Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host, Mitch. Glad to have you here. Cyclonic Rift, one of the most powerful cards in Commander, according to many. Many people also think it deserves to be in every single deck that it can be in, but is that really true? Here to talk with me about that and some other things on the show today is Alek. Say hi, Alek.
Hey, everyone.
That wasn't hi, that was hey, everyone.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Script writing.
Anyways, Alek and I are going to be talking. Sorry to throw you off. Alek and I are going to be talking about good stuff today on the show. But before we get into that, just a couple of quick notes. So, liking, sharing, and subscribing always help this channel. Again, thank you to everyone. We just crossed a couple of weeks ago, a couple of days ago. I don't know when this is coming out, sorry. 100,000 subscribers, which is absolutely outstanding. And I cannot tell you how excited I am. So again, like, share, and subscribe always helps the channel. Make sure you're following us on Twitter as well at EDH Quarters. It just gives you some quick sneak peeks into maybe what is kind of going on behind the scenes or some future episodes as well. The TCG Player affiliate link really helps as well. The general one is bit.ly/Commander's Quarters. If you're on a deck tech, though, also any of those deck tech, any of those deck list links as well work. But if you want to be sure that you're, using that affiliate link, then yes, use the general bit.ly/Commander's Quarters. Again, if you're already buying those decks and cards, it just helps support the show in any kind of a small way, and it really helps out. Playmats and merchandise. So thecommandersquarters.com is the place you can go for all of our playmats and merchandise. But actually, I think by the time that this episode comes out, the Kickstarter campaign is going to have launched. And let's see if I can edit this incorrectly where I've got, showing this at the same time. But here is the new playmat, courtesy of Santiago Rosas. It is called the Porcine Stand, and it is fantastic. So I'll probably throw an image up on the screen as well. But I'm very excited about it. Again, it's only going to be available for 30 days on that Kickstarter campaign. Again, I don't know exactly what day this episode's coming out, so it'd probably be less than 30 days at this point. But again, check it out. I'm going to definitely have that link in the description for you as well. And then finally, Patreon. I cannot thank my patrons enough. I would not be anywhere near here today without them. There's a lot of different rewards and a lot of different tiers. So go ahead and check us out at patreon.com/Commander's Quarters. Okay, now that that's all out of the way, Alek, let's just talk about you.
Sure.
So, Alek, I know your background in Magic, but can you tell everyone else your background in Magic?
Sure, yeah. So I started in Magic in 7th edition. Dad bought me one of those intro decks. I think it was the Thorn Elemental with that weird computer program.
Love Thorn Elemental.
So started really getting into Magic and played throughout like high school, middle school, etc. But I didn't really start really playing Magic until college.
Gotcha.
I met a really great community up in the Fargo and Moorhead area, and they taught me how to play properly and to have a good time doing so. So that, I was hooked as soon as I started playing with them. And then I played Standard for quite a few years, but then eventually transitioned in Commander and been doing that ever since. So yeah, it's been amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen the Kydel and Ravos deck, I believe Kydel and Ravos, that was actually Alek's deck list that I featured on the channel a little while back. So go ahead and check that one out. But he is a very synergistic deck builder, and I am just always astounded by some of the turns that he pulls off.
It is kind of fun to watch sometimes.
Sometimes. If you're on the winning end of it.
Yeah.
No, just kidding. Okay, so let's get on to our main topic today, though, which I'm just going to call the good stuff debate. So we'll get to Cyclonic Rift in a bit. But there are many cards in general that people consider to be auto-includes or quote-unquote good stuff. And today we're going to go over 10 cards in total, 5 each, that we consider to be good stuff for a variety of reasons. So, Alek, I'm going to let you handle the definition for this one. What exactly do you consider to be good stuff? What is your definition of good stuff?
Yeah, so for those maybe not super familiar, to me, good stuff is the card selections that you make when deck building. They tend to be cards that are extremely powerful in the Commander format, so much so that they're almost like functionally unique cards.
Gotcha.
There's not many that like tend to match them on the same power level. So oftentimes they're selected purely because of this power, the impact that they have on the game.
Gotcha.
The reason why we're having kind of this discussion is sometimes they pop up in decks where they seem like not to really fit with the rest of the deck's
Yep.
strategy or synergy. And so sometimes like you have questions about like, well, why do you play this particular card when
Yep.
it doesn't really fit with what you're trying to do? And it's just purely because, well, I can win the game off the back of this card.
Sure. And sometimes kind of on EDH rec, like you might see, oh, this card is played 66% in all of these kind of decks for this commander.
Yep.
Therefore, I have to include it because everyone else is doing that. And so it's kind of like that kind of fallacy where everyone is, it's kind of like it's a snowball effect, I guess, where like, if one person puts in their deck, then another does, and it just keeps going, regardless of people actually kind of think about it and say, does this actually belong in the deck? They still might do it just because everyone else is doing it and it's a good card, but does it really fit in this deck?
It's almost like peer pressure.
Like EDH rec is peer pressuring you.
Everyone plays this and so must you.
I'm just kidding. I love EDH rec. Okay, cool. So now that we've gotten the good stuff discussion kind of going with the definition, let's get into the cards. Alek, what is your first card that you want to bring up as a good stuff card?
Sure. So this one is Craterhoof Behemoth, which happens to be a green creature, costs 5 and triple green. It's a beast. It's 5/5 with haste. The ability is when Craterhoof Behemoth enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control.
Mm-hmm.
So I put this deck card on the list because it's often just like one of those win the game now cards.
Sure.
Provided you have enough creatures on board.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a creature also, it's super tutorable. So I feel like one of the most common synergies I see with this is you cast Tooth and Nail and you find this and Avenger of Zendikar.
Yep.
Stack the triggers so that way Craterhoof buffs the whole team really high with the creature tokens built off the Avenger of Zendikar.
Yep. And
then a lot of times you just swing in and win with everything.
Sure.
Yeah.
I've definitely lost to Craterhoof before.
Yeah, more than just a few times.
Yes.
But the reason why I consider it a good stuff is I feel like sometimes it's just a boring way to win the game.
Sure.
Because of the sheer power of this card and its converted mana cost, it can just seem like strictly like this is the one card that I will use to win the game.
Sure.
But so when you play someone's deck that has this in it, I've seen a lot where that's just like the only win condition it feels like that they want to find in order to win the game. And so when you get killed by the same effect over and over and over again, it's just like, okay, can we have the deck do anything else?
Something different.
Yeah, is this just the basic synergy?
Very good card, deserves to be in a lot of decks, but maybe it's a bit overplayed just because kill me in a different way, please.
Right. Right. So, I mean, like, not to say that this isn't a good strategy, but there's just other ways that we could foresee winning the game and other cards that may have like a different synergy with a different type of deck.
Sure. So what are some of those cards then?
Yeah. So a couple options I have. The first one being Strength of the Pack, which is a green sorcery, 4 colorless and double green. And it says simply put 2 +1/+1 counters on each creature you control.
Okay.
So this card, while not immediately impactful as Craterhoof Behemoth, this spell puts the counters on your creatures immediately, and it can have a longer impact on the game.
Sure.
It's not one of those where like Craterhoof hits and then you have to win the game.
You either win or you don't win. Yeah.
Right.
If someone has a fog effect, then you're just out all of that extra power that you just got.
Right. And oftentimes you're completely tapped out, so someone else can swing in for the win after your turn. So this spell not only then puts the +1/+1 counters on your creatures for a while, it also synergizes really super well with other +1/+1 effects.
Sure.
So like creatures with Graft or cards like Volrath the Shapestealer, Inspiring Call, or Bioshift.
Sure.
So it gives you like some additional flexibility with what you're using.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of +1/+1 counters decks out there that I'm sure also use Craterhoof, but they could be considering something like this too.
For sure. Yeah. The other card I want to point out is Thunderfootbalith, which is another green card, green creature, 4 and double green. It's also a beast, 5/5, and has trample. The ability on this card, though, is Lieutenant. So as long as you control your commander, Thunderfootbalith gets +2/+2, and other creatures you control get +2/+2 and have trample. So similar concept. Again, not as immediately impactful as Craterhoof Behemoth, but keeps that benefit or buff around much longer.
Sure, as long as your commander's in play, your entire team gets bigger and gets that trample as well.
Yeah. The trample, this being a little bit more of a relevant thing. I play an Animar deck that cares more about just like having a mass of creatures.
Sure.
But having this buff stick around for a while, keeps the deck a little bit more defensive at times. And, it gives Animar the trample, which that's really all you need sometimes to win. So this is a good all-around card for
Absolutely. Well, and the mana difference, 6 to 8 mana, that is a significant jump, I would say. 8 mana is really high up on the curve. 6 mana is pretty reasonable.
Right.
So obviously green has no problem with ramping, getting it out, but you might be able to get this out earlier and make an earlier impact than potentially Crater Hoof Behemoth.
Yeah, for sure. And then an even cheaper card, mana cost-wise, is Return of the Wild Speaker.
I love that one.
Which is 4 and a green, and it's an instant. So it says, choose one, draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control, or non-human creatures you control get +3/+3 until end of turn. So once again, not as impactful as Crater Hoof as soon as you play it, but it does allow that tactical flexibility to either buff your team and potentially swing out to win, or just like be a nice combat trick to be able to surprise your opponent. Or you can also draw those cards.
Draw a ton of cards.
Yeah. So whether or not you can win the game or not, this gives you that option to be like, well, maybe this isn't the greatest time to try to swing in. Instead, I'm just going to draw a bunch of cards and maybe get there next turn.
Yep. It's a Rishkar's expertise, essentially, without the casting something for free, but at instant speed. You do have to remember that this does not affect your humans, but how many green humans are running? There's plenty of green humans, but
But that have this particular strategy, not always.
Exactly.
Yeah. So for sure. Okay.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think Crater Hoof is a great card. It is a very good stuff card. You see it in a ton of decks. And yeah, there's definitely other ways that you could win outside of it. So start exploring some of those.
Yeah. All right. Which one you got?
Oh, okay. This is going to probably upset some people. All right, so my first good stuff card that I think is actually, this one's overplayed, is Solemn Simulacrum.
The saddest boy.
AKA Sad Robot. So Solemn Simulacrum is let's just read it real quick for those of you who don't know. It's a 2/2 golem that costs 4. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library, and when it dies, you may draw a card. So it ramps you by land, and when it dies, it replaces itself with drawing a card. Not too bad, but it does cost 4 mana. So the reason this sees so much play is because land ramp is very powerful. That's why green has a clear advantage when it comes to ramp, because green has all the land ramp spells. Not all of them, but essentially all of them.
Yeah.
So this is kind of other colors try to play this and say, like, look, I can do it too. Yes and no. You're not doing it nearly as efficiently or as well. Yes, you can draw a card when it dies, but that's not worth it, in my opinion. It's just not. It's not worth the 4 mana to get 1 land and then eventually draw a card.
Right.
It's too costly for what it does, and at that point, you're just better off playing other cards, mana rocks, anything else that is just more efficient and helps you ramp quicker. One of my big things that I bring up on a lot of episodes is for the most part, a lot of decks, at least the ones that I build, you want to ramp on turn 2, which is why the signets are good, which is why the talismans are good, rampant growth is good. Turn 2 is the turn to ramp. Cultivate, we'll get to that later, is the turn 3 ramp. That's still within green. That's if Sad Robot was 3 mana, I'd be completely fine with playing it.
Yeah, it still gets you 2 cards.
Absolutely. Any color outside of green, I'd be fine with playing it. But 4 mana is too much. So, a couple other cards that you should be considering. You probably heard of this one before if you've ever seen the channel. Wayfarer's Bobble. So Wayfarer's Bobble, exactly, for those of you who don't know, is an artifact that costs 1. You pay 2 and you sack it, and you get a basic land into play tapped. Excuse me. So, Wayfarer's Bobble, fantastic card, obviously. I love it. It's great. It goes in any deck. It ramps you with lands, again, which is more powerful than mana rocks, because in our platform, in the Commander format, destroying lands is kind of frowned upon. So it's a safer way to ramp than mana rocks, which, if someone casts a Vandal Blast, then those are gone. So land ramp, better. Sad Robot, not.
Yeah.
Still, if you're looking outside of the talismans and outside of the signets, you can run something like Pendant of Prosperity in any color. Green, again, probably doesn't want this, but other colors might. Pendant of Prosperity is an artifact that costs 3. It enters the battlefield under the control of an opponent of your choice, and then you can pay 2 and tap it to draw a card, and then put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. Pendant of Prosperity's owner draws a card, and then that player plays a land card from their hand onto the battlefield. So essentially, you give it to someone else. They can choose to pay that 2 and tap it and draw that card and put a land into play, but they're the ones that have to pay that cost. Yeah. After you paid that initial, 3 mana? 3 mana, and given it to someone, essentially you're going to be taxing them and getting a beneficial effect out of drawing and putting a land into play. Now, they're also getting a benefit from it.
Right.
And this is kind of more of this might be a political tool because you're not going to give it to the person who's ahead of everyone else, most likely. You want to give it to someone who's incentivized to use it. Maybe you and someone else are behind, the main player or whoever's out in front right now. And so you give it to someone else and say like, hey, let's catch up. Like we help each other out right here. But essentially, you're depriving them of a resource while also benefiting them, but you get free benefits from it. So if this just gets activated once, it's worth it.
Yeah.
If this gets activated twice, it's amazing. Like 3 mana for 2 lands into play as well as drawing 2 cards. That's fantastic.
The power it has to catch you up in a game is
exactly.
just amazing. Yeah.
Exactly. And actually even kind of different tech as well. If you can steal it, then you're just paying 2 to activate it, drawing 2 cards, and then putting 2 lands into play. So that's potentially another way to go about it too.
Or you put it under Mirsteel the Pretender.
There you go. Talking from a true Mirsteel player.
Yep.
Again, I mentioned this before too. Okay, so outside of those, any efficient mana rock, in my opinion, is going to be better than Sad Robot. So what is this? Firemine Vessel. Let's just say that one, okay? It costs the exact same amount of Sad Robot. It costs 4. It comes into play tapped, and you can tap it for 2 mana of 2 different colors. So it gives you twice as much mana as a Sad Robot. Yes, it's a mana rock, so it is more likely to get destroyed. But still, I think that efficiency is worth the risk compared to the same costed robot that only gets you half the amount.
Right.
So I'll get off my case on the sad robot. But yeah, sad robot can stay sad for all I care. All right, let's move on.
Okay. So my next card is actually 2 cards, but they kind of fill the same slot.
Sure.
It is Ashnod's Altar and Phyrexian Altar. For those of you who don't know who they are, Ashnod's Altar is a 3 mana artifact that says sacrifice a creature, add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. And then Phyrexian Altar says, it's also a 3 mana artifact. It says sacrifice a creature, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason why this is good is obviously any card that provides a repeatable and free sacrifice outlet will always be considered in certain decks, like aristocrats, reanimator decks, tokens especially. However, when you make a card that's that low, affordable on the casting cost, colorless, and with an effect that generates mana, it's kind of unique on its own.
Yes.
So it sees a ton of play in those particular type of decks.
Free mana is a very powerful thing on a free sacrifice outlet.
Right, for sure. So the reason it's on this list, though, is I've seen this card played, and while it provides that effect of the free sacrifice outlet at any time, it can even get around things like split seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes there just isn't anything to do with the mana.
Yeah.
Plenty of times we've seen it where it ramps them into a great board position, but sometimes it just doesn't really do anything.
Sure, it's not fulfilling what it could do. It's just being the free sacrifice outlet.
So then it feels like you're not really getting the full value out of the card.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got a couple other suggestions of additional cards that could potentially have greater value or more synergistic connection with what the deck wants to do overall.
Mm-hmm.
So one of those is called Spawning Pit, which is a 2 mana artifact, so a little bit cheaper. And it says, sacrifice a creature to put a charge counter on Spawning Pit. And then has a second ability that says, pay 1 colorless mana and remove 2 charge counters from Spawning Pit. And then you put a 2/2 spawn artifact creature token into play.
Yep.
I feel like this card is criminally underplayed in token decks.
Oh, yeah.
Just because, a lot of times token get put behind because if they get wrathed, they lose all their tokens and they got to spend all that time rebuilding their board, which is typically the way that they win or generate card advantage or board advantage. So having this card in play allows them to put their creatures that are going to be dying into this spawn pit, and then they can just use it later to generate more creatures.
Yeah, you're essentially getting back half the creatures that you had.
Right.
You have to pay 1 mana for each creature you're getting back, but they're not going to waste.
Yeah. So it's a great way to recycle or reuse those.
It's kind of like
tokens
board wipe insurance, kind of.
Yeah, and even in reanimator decks and such, you were going to be sacrificing the creature anyway.
Yep.
You might as well put it into something that can generate you just another creature, more card advantage, and board advantage later.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, so the second card I want to talk about is Fallen Ideal. This is a pet card of mine. It is an enchantment aura, costs 2 and a black.
Mm-hmm.
And it says, enchant creature. Enchanted creature has flying, and sacrifice a creature. This creature gets +2/+1 until end of turn. And then it has kind of that Rancor effect where when Fallen Ideal is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, return Fallen Ideal to its owner's hand.
Gotcha.
I like this card a lot, even though it is stuck in the black tree, not colorless, so can't fit in every deck.
Sure.
But for those that do play black, it provides a kind of almost of a surprise or interesting commander damage effect.
Kind of alternative win, like you might not usually win in an aristocrat style deck with your commander swinging out. In fact, you generally don't. But this says, hey, you thought I was going to do this, but now here comes Teysa Karlov swinging for 40 damage. Or 21.
So just has that additional viability and flexibility with this, and still generates that free sacrifice outlet.
Absolutely. Well, and the weakness when it comes to auras too generally is that if your creature that has it dies, you lose it. But since it has that Rancor effect, it comes back to your hand, so you're not losing out anything. Yes, you have to recast it, but you keep getting it back.
Right, for sure. So it's very it's hard to get rid of.
Well, and since actually it's sacrifice a creature, right, not another. So you can sacrifice the creature that's on in case someone tries to exile your enchantment, or your aura. So it's hard to get rid of.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right, the last card I want to talk about is Carnage Altar. So again, another 2 mana artifact. It says pay 3 mana, colorless mana, sacrifice a creature and draw a card. So not a free sacrifice outlet this time, but it has that benefit of drawing you a card.
Yep.
So now instead of just producing mana off the creatures you sacrifice to this effect, you just dig deeper into your deck.
You're getting some card advantage. You're replacing those cards that are on the field.
So not an obvious switch in terms of like power level, but it's one that if you care more about drawing cards, digging for deeper answers, this is a great inclusion that I feel like just is underplayed.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome.
Good picks. I like them.
All right, what do you got next?
Next up, this might upset some people. I think all my picks are going to upset people. Okay, next up is Sun Titan, which I think is very overplayed. So Sun Titan, for those of you who don't know, is a 6/6 giant that has vigilance and it costs 4 white. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, you may return target permanent card with converted mana cost of 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this is a recursion spell on a big 6/6 vigilant body that can continue to provide value when it's attacking.
Sure.
So,
not bad, but...
Okay, let me ask you a question real quick. Would you pay 6 mana to get one thing back that costs 3 or less from your graveyard?
Seems a little too expensive nowadays.
It does. And so you really don't get that value until this actually attacks. So if you don't have a way to give it haste, or if you don't have a way to guarantee that you're getting that next attack, not all the time, but if you're not getting an extra attack through, it's just not worth it. So I see Sun Titan... People assume that you're going to get those extra attacks. Oh, I'm just going to keep doing that. I'm going to get my Oblivion Ring back. I'm going to get my whatever your 3 mana permanent from your graveyard. You're going to get all of them back with Sun Titan. But if it gets removed, you're you pay too much. Yeah. Also, I think that it's not just that. I think it's kind of overrated in that aspect, but it's also just people seem to try to put it in every single kind of deck that they can. Sun Titan, I think, works in very specific decks where most of your permanents have a low converted mana cost. Where, you want very specific things back that are going to be very impactful and that you can guarantee that you're going to get them back.
Sure.
But in other decks where you might have, a lot of your permanents are, let's say your mana curve is around 4 or 5, you're not going to have nearly as many targets for that. And so I think there's a lot more impactful spells that are out there that can get you back a ton of things at once and be a lot more impactful in the decks that could use those and that might be using Sun Titan right now. Let's go through a couple of those now. So the first one is going to be Rally the Ancestors, which is a fantastic card. I think it's very underplayed. Yeah. It's an instant for X white. It says return each creature card with converted mana cost of X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Exile this creature at the beginning of the next end step. Exile Rally the Ancestors. So essentially what you're going to do with this most of the time is cast it right before your turn for X equals whatever your highest converted mana cost creature is, or the one that you need to get back. Yeah. In aristocrat style decks, which this can come in huge in, usually you're going to have a very low mana curve, so again, like 3 or less. So Sun Titan could be effective in those decks, but again, that's only getting you back one thing at a time. Rally the Ancestors is going to get you back all those creatures, and then you can swing. They're not going to have haste, but you're casting before your turn, so you can swing with them. You can also sacrifice them, so they're not going to be exiled in those kinds of decks. Yep. It's going to be a much more bigger, impactful play, and especially in those aristocrat style strategies or reanimation strategies where you're just trying to have a big turn like that and just kind of surprise and take everyone out of nowhere.
Yeah.
So...
I mean, sure, it doesn't get other permanents, but I see Sun Titan bring back lands all the time, and it's like,
6
mana to bring back a land seems a little too expensive.
Well, white needs to ramp somehow. Just kidding. I mean, it's not necessarily a bad play, but again, like that shouldn't be what you have your Sun Titan in there for. Yes, that is true. So Rally the Ancestors is fantastic for creatures. One that is great for artifacts and enchantments is Open the Vaults. It is a sorcery for 4 white. It says return all artifact and enchantment cards from all graveyards to the battlefield under their owner's control. So this does affect every single player, but if you're in a deck that really cares about getting artifacts or enchantments into your graveyard and back out, and just having some big effects like that, then this can be much more impactful, getting back everything at once rather than Sun Titan. One that I'm going to bring up, and we'll include the deck list in the description, is Alex Breya's deck, Breya deck, where this kind of effect can come in huge, where you're just sacrificing a ton of artifacts, you're churning through your deck, and then you're bringing them all back, and then you're sacrificing them again, and again, and again, and again. And so that card just has much more impact instead of Sun Titan, where you're like, okay, I cast Sun Titan, I get 1 artifact back. Cool. Pass turn. Next turn, I'll attack with Sun Titan. 1 artifact back. Not nearly as impactful, not as big of a play, and again, it's not for every deck, but the decks that's in, it's going to be much more impactful.
And then what we've been talking about is like be intentional with. So some of these cards can have more power than you might think based on how you build your deck around them. Yeah, absolutely.
And then actually one last one that really synergizes with Alek's previous sack outs that he was talking about is Face Reward, which is also in his Breya deck as well. Yeah. Face Reward is an instant for 3 and a white. It says return to the battlefield all permanent cards in your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn. So this does affect all permanents just on your side. So it can get you back everything. You can get back your lands if you're sacrificing, say, an Evolving Wilds, and get you back every creature that you sacrifice, any artifacts that you sacrifice. It's just another big, impactful play, and it's also board wipe protection.
Yeah.
So it can just be a much bigger, more impactful play than a Sun Titan. And again, nothing against Sun Titan, but I think you're overplayed.
For sure.
Okay, let's get off the Sun Titan. What's your next one?
Okay. Card that I included on this list is Carne Liberated. So Carne Liberated is a planeswalker at 7 colorless mana. He starts in play at 6 loyalty counters. He has 3 abilities. +4 to target player exiles a card from his or her hand. -3 to exile target permanent, and -14 to restart the game, leaving in exile all non-aura permanent cards exiled with Carne Liberated. Then put those cards onto the battlefield under your control.
Gotcha.
So Carne is obviously a great card, which we see in a lot of different formats, especially modern.
Yeah, like Tron decks, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah, Tron. Yeah. And so like obviously he's got like a great effect, and exile is not unimportant a keyword in Commander, just because then you can kind of get rid of something immediately. So typically,
unless you're playing against a food chain deck, then you don't want to do that.
Well, yeah. So that's a little bit. That's another story. But so that -3 ability is typically what you would play Carne for.
Yep.
But honestly, kind of like as we discussed, Carne just sometimes feels like an overinvestment because he's a planeswalker. He shares all the weaknesses of planeswalkers, which means he can be attacked by creatures.
Yep.
And typically with a 4-player pod, you've got 3 opponents. You're going to have to go through those 3 turns, hope he isn't attacked, and then you have to either sacrifice him to -3 again, or take that turn to +4 him in order to keep him around for another -3.
Yep, hope he sticks around after that too.
Yeah, and sometimes Carne can kind of put a little bit of a target on your head because people know like, okay, this is an on-board exile effect.
Yep.
I don't want to lose my stuff to his ability. I need to get rid of him, and I've got this flyer, so I can do that pretty easily.
Yeah, you're kind of rallying everyone against you when you play something that powerful potentially that can completely warp the game if it ultimates. So.
And to be honest, like the price impact of Carne is difficult. He's like $50+ at this point. So still a significant investment for a card that, might remove one.
It doesn't do that much in Commander. Enough to justify that price in
1
Commander.
or 2 cards, it just doesn't feel like it. Yeah. So the options that I've chosen as replacements are significantly cheaper cards, both strictly in price. They're the same converted mana or cost to activate. So the first one is Meteor Golem. So this is a 3/3 golem that says when Meteor Golem enters the battlefield, destroy a target non-land permanent and opponent controls. Also 7 mana, just like Carne.
Yep.
So while it's still 7 mana, the fact that this is a creature makes it easier to recur than a planeswalker.
Yeah.
Tons of different effects bring back creatures. Not a ton of them bring back planeswalkers.
That's true. Well, recur and also blink, flicker, that kind of stuff too.
Right.
Like that's
for sure.
Flickering planeswalkers isn't as easy as flickering creatures.
Yeah, definitely. So a nice effect that's also just like 8 cents right now.
Pick up all of them. Yeah, buy whatever $50 divided by 8 cents is. Pick up that many meteor golems. It's
don't do that, but okay. All right, so the next one I have is Unstable Obelisk, which is a 3 mana artifact that has the ability to tap to add a colorless mana to your mana pool, so it's a mana rock.
Yep.
But also has an effect to pay 7 mana into it and tap it and sacrifice it to destroy target permanent.
Gotcha.
So it has a very similar effect to Karn in that it has a 7 mana effect to destroy something, but it has more playability in the early turns.
Yep.
It's a mana rock, and you can stick around and generate your mana until you're ready to take care of that one thing that's been bothering you the entire game.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess in this one you can use at instant speed as well, whereas Karn you have to do it on your turn. So if someone plays a threat that's immediate, this can deal with it. Karn can't.
Yeah, definitely.
So
it's definitely that threat, instant speed threat.
Yep.
Speaking of which, the other card that I want to talk about is Scour from Existence.
Yeah.
So this is just a 7 mana instant, 7 colorless mana, and just says exile target permanent. So again, exile is an important keyword in Commander.
Absolutely.
Important here. And then this also like hides the fact that you've got this effect in your hand.
Yes.
Being able to cast it at instant speed can take care of that one threat that's either just going to destroy the entire board or specifically targeting you. So it's a great surprise removal effect.
Yeah, absolutely. Or you're saving up your mana, for you have options at right before your turn where instead of having to dedicate that 7 mana to Karn on your turn, you can hold off with this and you can decide, do I actually need to use this or not, or maybe I'll cast my Pull from Tomorrow or whatnot for a lot of mana too.
And can be brought back with things like Archaeomancer that can bring back instants or sorceries.
Again, much easier to bring back pretty much anything except for Planeswalkers.
Yeah, so. And 17 cents isn't that bad for this kind of effect.
That's pretty good.
Yeah,
that's pretty good. I like your picks.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Nice. Okay, moving on. Again, another card that's going to upset some people.
Why?
Why do you keep picking these? I don't know. Eternal Witness. So Eternal Witness is a 2/1 human shaman that costs 1 green. When Eternal Witness enters the battlefield, you may return target card from your graveyard to your hand. So again, I think this is kind of like, I think every single one I brought up so far is kind of it's used in too many decks. The amount of mana that it costs, I don't believe is good enough for its effect in most situations.
Right.
So if you said to me, hey, you get 1 card back and you get a 2/1 on the board, is that usually that worth it for 3 mana?
Debatable.
Debatable. There is a debate going on for that. Sure. Okay. For decks that can use and abuse it, if they can recur it to then get its effect again, or if they can blink it to get its effect again, that is very useful. But for most decks that are just putting that in their deck, they might not have another way to do that and to actually get extra value out of that. And how many times in Commander have you said, you know what, I just really need a 2/1 on the board. That's just going to be so impactful if I had a 2/1. Never. Rarely. So.
Crater of Behemoth plus that.
Yeah, okay, fine. But still, I would much rather have a lot of other effects. And let's go through some of them now, just really quick. Regrowth is kind of like the standard for recursion in green. It's a fantastic card. I'm glad it was reprinted in M25 because it dropped it from, I think, $1 to like 10 cents. So go get them now. Regrowth is a sorcery that costs 1 in a green and says return target card from your graveyard to your hand. So it costs 1 less, but it's not even just 1 less. It's also 1 green less. So it's much easier to cast for most decks. Mm-hmm. So I think that's something that some decks don't. it's not impossible to cast things that cost 2 green, obviously. Yeah. But I think that some decks don't really even consider that, Blue Sun Zenith has 3 blue in its mana cost. Like that's a lot to, maybe there's some situations where you then can't cast something else that has blue in it or, with Eternal Witness green. Yeah. So it's much more efficient. You're getting 1 card back for 2 mana, which is a good rate. And again, the 2/1 body, you can take it or leave it most of the time. It's not going to be worth that 1 mana.
And that helps with the mana efficiency too. By simply being 2 mana instead of 3, you can easier cast that card that you brought back.
Absolutely.
Maybe even the same turn that you brought back from the graveyard.
Absolutely. There are going to be times where you cast an Eternal Witness and you're 1 mana short from casting that thing, and you're like, I wish I should have listened to Mitch and played that Regrowth.
Yeah, do it.
Okay, another one. Seeds Renewal. This used to be a very budget card. It's like $1 something now. Please reprint it, Wizards. Seeds Renewal is a sorcery for 6 in a green, so it's pretty expensive, but it has Undaunted, so it's going to cost less, which means it costs 1 less for each opponent, and it says return up to 2 target cards from your graveyard to your hand, exile Seeds Renewal. So most of the time, if you're playing in a 4-player game, you're going to have 3 opponents. It's going to cost you a total of 4 mana. So again, like Regrowth, it's going to be you get back half as many cards as the amount of mana you put into it. So you're putting in 4 mana, you get back 2. It's a fantastic rate. So unlike Eternal Witness, you're basically spending 1 more mana and you get back an extra card, which is definitely worth it in my book.
Oh yeah, well, especially in decks that like have strong synergies. Typically, you're going to have multiple cards that have similar effects or can benefit, and so getting 2 cards instead of 1 is actually very impactful.
Yeah, exactly. You're not making that, okay, which one of these 2 do I get back? I need to I need to do 2 different things. You've got more flexibility with that. You've got more kind of impactful plays that you can make. When someone thinks that they've got you on the ropes, then you get back your 2 best cards from your graveyard, you're going to be able to punch through.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, one that can be even more impactful for some decks, not for all, is All Sun's Dawn, and I think this one is criminally underplayed as well. It's a sorcery for 4 and a green. It says, for each color, return up to 1 target card of that color from your graveyard to your hand, exile All Sun's Dawn. So essentially, you're getting back, depending on what your deck is. I only recommend this card really for decks that are 3 or more mana, 3 or more colors. You can get back up to 3 cards for 5 mana. That's fantastic. If you've got a 4-color deck, you're getting back 4 cards for 5 mana potentially. 5-color deck, even better. 1 card for each mana that you spend on that. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Again, you don't really want to run this in a 1 or 2 color deck. It's not going to be as impactful, obviously, but it can be really impactful in a deck like Joda, getting you back a ton of things, and you're just going through and casting. Instead of just playing 1 Eternal Witness and getting back 1 thing for 3 mana, you can get back 5 cards for 5 mana. That's just a much better rate, and again, much more impactful plays. And again, I think Eternal Witness is not a bad card, and the decks that can abuse it and get that effect over and over again, keep doing that. But the decks that are just saying, oh, it's a good green card, I need to include an evergreen deck, I think you're wrong.
Yeah. We have a bunch of different options that are available to us. Yeah.
100% agree.
Awesome.
All right. What's your next one?
All right. My next card is Elesh Norn Grand Cenobite. So this is a very commonly seen white card that is 5 and double white. It's a legendary creature. It's a Praetor, and it is 4/7. It has vigilance, and it has other creatures you control get +2/+2, and also creatures your opponents control get -2/-2. So this card is obviously great because it has that dual Anthem and negative Anthem effects for both you and your opponents. Anthems have been around forever in Magic, and you always see a population of players that just love to play these kind of effects. Yeah. I mean, it's just great when your creatures are just keep getting stronger, and especially for this card when your opponent's cards keep getting weaker.
Sure.
I put this on the Good Stuff deck though, Good Stuff list though, because I feel like there isn't always an intent behind the effects.
Sure.
It's just I just want to make my creatures bigger, and I want to potentially keep my opponents locked out of the game.
Sure.
Sometimes there's only a few times I've seen the Elesh Norn be played defensively, and that I want to take care of an opponent that is getting too far ahead creature-wise.
Sure.
It's really difficult to deal with their giant dinosaurs, for example.
Yep.
So I want to make them smaller.
Yep.
So, and then also to the effect that it impacts all of your opponents.
Yep.
So maybe you've got a couple opponents that are struggling. Might completely wipe out their boards, and then all of a sudden it's just you versus the other person that's got a strong board presence.
Sure.
That doesn't really always lead to great games, and just seems like an unintentional negative impact on the board.
If you're playing a Kaikar deck, you're probably going to be too happy when this comes down.
Right, for sure. Not great. So there's a few options that I would recommend as alternatives to that. And so for those people that do play Elesh Norn defensively on occasion or for that purpose, Curse of Death's Hold might be a good alternative option. Yeah, it's a black card. It's an enchantment, which is an Aura Curse, which is kind of interesting. And it's 3 colorless, black. And it says enchant target player. Creatures enchanted player controls get -1/-1. So this is a much better effect if you're looking to kind of control an opponent's board that might be trying to get a little bit further ahead, but doesn't have that negative impact to the other players.
Sure, you're not putting that big target on your back because you've got that in play. You might say, hey, can you use this political tool? Hey, I'm using this on this player to slow them down. Kind of work with me here.
Yeah, for sure. I'm taking care of this. I need your help on a couple of other things, and we can kind of get back to balance. Yeah, for sure. All right. Also, as an enchantment, it's much more difficult to remove.
Yes.
For certain decks. So
actually, a lot of things we brought up kind of are creatures generally, and
Yeah.
just creatures are the easiest permanent type to remove.
yeah, definitely.
So.
All right. Second card I have is Marshal's Anthem. This is another enchantment. It is 2 and double white, and has a multi-kicker effect for 1 and a white. So it says creatures you control get +1/+1, so still has that Anthem effect. But also, when Marshal's Anthem enters the battlefield, you can return up to X target creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield, where X is the number of times Marshal's Anthem was kicked.
Okay.
So you got an Anthem effect, and you can play that fairly early compared to the 7 mana cost of Elishnorn.
Yep, absolutely.
So if that's all you were looking for, then sure, you got an Anthem for 4 mana.
Yep.
But also has that additional effect of recurring creatures that then subsequently get buffed by Martial Anthem's effect. So just has that additional tactical flexibility.
Yep.
If you just happen to have a ton of mana on board, you can just like return a whole bunch of creatures at once.
Absolutely.
So just like all upside in those decks that care about that particular type of effect.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right, the last card I want to talk about is McKay S the Lunarch. So this is a legendary creature, human cleric. Its base power and toughness is 0/0, and its converted mana cost is X and a white. However, it says McKay S the Lunarch enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it.
Okay.
And then has a tap ability. It says put a +1/+1 counter on McKay S. And another tap ability that says remove a +1/+1 counter from McKay S and put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control.
Gotcha.
So we just talked about how Elishnorn at 7 mana can be a little bit difficult to cast in the early game and have that impact.
Yep.
And like Craterhoof, it feels like it just kind of like needs to win the game because you've invested all that time and mana into that one card.
And you've upset your opponents.
Yeah, for sure. Whereas McKay S can come down fairly early.
Sure.
And like subtly impact the board as turns go on.
Yep.
You can add counters to him, or you can like start churning those counters onto the creatures that you start playing.
Yeah.
So you just have that more static effect on board that entire time.
Gotcha.
Or in later game, you can just drop him for a bunch of mana and he's huge.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, very flexible card that works especially well in token synergies or even +1/+1 counter synergies too.
Yeah. So the more cards that you put on board, then activate him for, the better your board state's going to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I like it.
All right.
Good
what do you
picks.
got next?
Next up, got actually probably the most expensive card to bring up so far. Not that you brought up. Karn's pretty expensive. But the one that I have, Consecrated Sphinx. Consecrated Sphinx is a 4/6 flying sphinx that costs 4 blue, and it's very simple. It says, whenever an opponent draws a card, you may draw 2 cards. Drawing cards in Commander is a very powerful thing.
Yep.
Just slightly. So drawing 2 cards every single time one of your opponents draws 1 is pretty crazy.
It just feels so bad when you draw a card and your opponent's like, oh, yep, I draw 2.
Perfect. Yeah, I get 2. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that. Yes, I mean, even if that just stays on the table for 1 turn around, you are at the very least getting 6 cards.
Yep.
So if people play other effects where they're drawing cards, you're drawing even more. If someone's got a Ristic Study, thank you very much.
Yep.
It's a very powerful card. I don't know if I can say it's overplayed, but I think that people, again, we brought it multiple times, creatures are the easiest things to remove.
Yep.
Consecrated Sphinx, I haven't seen it stick around for too many times. No. I see it is public enemy number 1 as soon as it comes out, because that person's going to get way ahead on cards if that is allowed to come.
Yep.
If that is allowed to stay on the board, then things are just going to get out of hand. So that person immediately puts a target on that and on their back as well.
Right. Well, I've seen games too where like someone plays a Consecrated Sphinx and then before their turn ends, someone will Doomblade it.
Oh yeah.
And then it's like, oh, I've invested 6 mana into something.
Draw 0 cards.
Draw 0 cards, but I still have that target on my back because I've chosen to play this card.
You're like, hey, yeah, this is exactly what I'm doing, and everyone's like, it's like that, huh? Okay.
Yeah. Nuclear option for
exactly.
sure.
Say goodbye to that and then goodbye to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. So, I think that Blue's got the most options, in my opinion, when it comes to card draw.
Yeah.
And it's a very powerful color when it comes to card draw. So there's just a lot of other things that you can consider playing instead of the Sphinx that I think are kind of more guaranteed to provide value, but more guaranteed to provide value.
Yeah.
More likely to provide value. So the first is going to be Psychic Possession, which actually I think is a very cool card, and awesome. It doesn't see enough play. It is an aura. It costs 2 blue. It says enchant opponent, skip your draw step. When enchanted opponent draws a card, you may draw a card. So it's kind of like a baby Consecrated Sphinx. There's a downside to it. You skip your draw step, which Consecrated Sphinx doesn't have. Yeah. You're only getting 1 card for whenever one opponent draws a card. But it is an enchantment, so it's a lot harder to remove than the Sphinx is.
For sure.
So it's also not as kind of a, again, like giant target on your back card.
Right.
I mean, you might upset that person that you played it on, but the other two people are probably going to be okay with that.
Yeah. They'll be like, okay, sure.
Yeah, sure. Whatever. And if you're putting it on, usually, okay, it depends on the meta if this is going to be a good card or not for you. But in a lot of metas that I play in, card draw is a very big thing, and people love drawing a ton of cards. Mm-hmm. So in plays out a Ristic Study, you put it on that person. Congratulations, you are the proud owner of a Ristic Study. Like, literally, you're staying at pace with the player that is going to be drawing the most cards. If you're playing against a Locust God deck and you attach it to them and they wheel, you're drawing for their wheel and your wheel.
Yeah.
So
not bad.
You're drawing double the amount that player is drawing. Like It's a card that's very flexible. Again, it's almost always got a use. It costs 2 less than the Sphinx, and it's not going to put a big target on your back, as big of a target on your back, and it's going to stay on the board more often than not compared to the Sphinx.
For sure.
Yeah. Okay. Next card. This is kind of like actually Consecrated Sphinx-ish, like Consecrated Sphinx Jr. Syrus Stagnation. It's a 5/7 Eldrazi with Devoid, which is a very relevant mechanic. It costs 4 blue, black, and says whenever a land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, that player exiles the top 2 cards of their library, and then you draw 2 cards. So this is less of a guaranteed draw than the Sphinx would be, because the Sphinx, everyone is pretty much going to be drawing 1 card at least during their turn, for the most part.
Yeah.
So everyone doesn't have to play a land during their turn, or at a certain point of the game might not have lands to play.
Right. Yeah.
But when they do play lands, or if you're playing against a landfall-based deck, they're going to have to still do that. They're going to be milling themselves, which, again, isn't necessarily the point of this card. In a mill deck, yes, can be great, but the point for you is to be drawing those cards.
Yep.
So it will still put a target on itself. It is a powerful enough card, I believe, that people be like, okay, I'm going to perk up a little bit. That is going to draw you a lot of cards, or it's going to prevent me from doing what I want to do.
And some people don't like mill. So
some people don't like mill, exactly. But if you're not playing it in a mill strategy, people usually give you the benefit of the doubt if you don't have Phoenix as your commander or Una as your commander that you're probably not trying to mill them, but you never know.
Yeah.
But it can also kind of be like not even a taxing effect, but like it can slow people down just because they're going to choose not to play lands. So even if you're not getting a draw effect out of it, you're still like de-ramping them kind of. You are preventing them from playing lands, which you're going to get ahead in a different way then. That's fine. Mm-hmm. Again, it still is a target. It's like creature, so it's more easy to remove, but it's not as big of a threat as the Sphinx, and it's not going to put that giant target on your back that might.
For sure.
So, last card, and this is one of my personal favorites, and actually the very first deck tech I did on this channel, it's Nezha Hall Primal Tide.
Take a deep breath.
Yeah. There's a lot to it. It's a 7/7 Elder Dinosaur that costs 5 blue. All right, and get ready. It can't be countered. You have no maximum hand size. Whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, draw a card, discard 3 cards, exile Nezha Hall, return to the battlefield, tapped under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. Everyone catch that? Okay, so thank you. So Nezha Hall does everything. Nezha Hall is fantastic. It does cost 1 more than the Sphinx, but let me tell you why, in my opinion, I'd rather have it in most decks anyways. It can't be countered, so that's automatic protection there. Mm-hmm. You can also discard 3 cards to get it out of there and bring it back at the end of the turn. So that saves it from target removal and from board wipes. You're going to have cards in your hand because it's going to draw you a card for each non-creature spell that's cast by anyone. Yep. There's no it's not like Ristic Study gives you 1 for each spell it's cast, whatever, but people can pay that taxing effect. There's no paying to get around this.
Yep.
And it gives you no maximum hand size, so you get to keep all those cards, unlike the Sphinx. Nezha Hall is just, it does everything. It does, yep. It's essentially, even better than an enchantment when it comes to being protected because it can protect itself.
Right.
So, in my opinion, and again, it is not going to tilt your opponents enough to come after you just because you have Nezha Hall necessarily versus the Sphinx.
They're going to spend too much time reading what the text says.
They're not even going to understand it. It's great. But no, Nezha Hall is a fantastic option. Consider that, please, above the Sphinx in certain situations. Again, Sphinx, great card. Might not be overplayed, but again, it's kind of one of those boring effects where, like, okay, they played the Sphinx. Let's kill that person.
Right, for sure.
All right, your turn. Right.
So, we mentioned it just a little bit ago, but my next card is Ristic Study, which is another enchantment, but it costs 2 and a blue. Mm. And it says, whenever an opponent plays a spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 1. I think a lot of people at this point are familiar with Ristic Study, but obviously it is great because it taxes your opponents.
Are you going to pay 1 for that?
Yes.
You gonna pay 1 for that?
Oh God. The number of times I've heard that across the it's like, especially in the decks where I play lots of things at once.
Yep.
It's just like just draw. I don't care.
I'll tell you when I'm gonna pay 1.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So, it taxes your opponents for whenever they play any spell.
Yep.
And, then you get card advantage off of that if they decide not to pay. And especially because it's so efficiently costed.
Yeah.
It comes down super early. I mean, like the number of times I've seen land, Soul Ring, and then next turn Rhystic Study. It's just,
Well, it was made well before Commander was considered, obviously, because in a 1v1, that's not that good of an effect.
Yeah,
it was a common, right? Printed a common.
Yeah, printed a common.
So,
but
and you had a $19 card.
Yeah. Now it is. It's like, oh, okay. So obviously it has that effect, which is great, and then can draw you a bunch of cards.
Yep.
But sometimes, in certain games, it may not really have that effect, and especially when you don't draw it early, it can seem a little inefficient for when you play it, and also like the impact it can have on your opponents when they decide, oh, I see he's playing Rhystic Study. Same thing like with the Sphinx, he just puts that target on your back.
Sure, yeah.
So like if you drop this on turn 6, it's just not, your opponents are much more able to like pay the mana so you don't draw the cards, and then they're going to just turn around and attack you because, you're taxing them now for everything that they pay. So a couple of different options that I have to play other than Rhystic Study. First one is Kumena's Awakening. So this is another enchantment, 2 double blue, and it has Ascend. So if you control 10 or more permanents, then you gain the city's blessing for the rest of the game. And it says, at the beginning of your upkeep, each player draws a card. And then if you have the city's blessing, instead, only you draw a card.
Okay.
So this is a really interesting card because not only do you have that same ability of being able to draw cards on your upkeep, sure, it doesn't draw you as many cards in a turn cycle, but it has the additional effect of being an early game kind of like political move, like, here, everyone have some cards.
Helping everyone out, exactly.
Yeah, no problem. Not as much of a target on your back for when you play this.
Yep.
But then once you get to a sufficient enough board state, only you're going to start it. Only you are going to be drawing the cards at that point.
And in Commander, it won't take you that long to get to 10 permanents, generally.
For sure.
So, I mean, if you're playing this and just with 4 lands and with it on the field, then that's 5 already. You're halfway there.
Yep, halfway there. And then you're just going to start gaining that subtle effect of drawing an additional card each turn. So it's great.
Well, that's a guaranteed draw versus Rhystic Study. People can, all your opponents, I've seen it before where, say, okay, if you pay, I'll pay, and we'll all pay, and they'll never get any effect out of it.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, another option is Monastery Siege. So this is another enchantment, 2 and a blue, just like Rhystic Study. So this says, as Monastery Siege enters the battlefield, choose cons or dragons. So the cons option is a little bit closer to the Rhystic Study effect, where it says at the beginning of your draw step, draw an additional card, then discard a card. And then the dragons effect says spells your opponents cast that target you or a permanent you control cost 2 more to cast.
Gotcha.
So right off the bat, you've got an additional effect that if the draw effect isn't going to be super great late game, you can instead turn it around to make your permanents and you more difficult to target for removal effects, for things that are just going to like make you lose the game, those kind of things.
But taxing, it's a more flexible card.
Yeah, definitely has that additional ability. But then the cons effect, draws you an additional card at the beginning of your turn. You do have to discard a card, but that sometimes can be great. Yeah. For like certain decks like Muldrotha, where basically your graveyard is almost an additional library or additional
second
hand.
Yeah.
Or certain other effects like cards that want to mass reanimate.
Sure.
Through like Rise of the Dark Realms or some other card like that.
Well, I think in general, looting is just undervalued by many people because like it might not be card advantage. It's not getting you ahead on cards, but it is card selection. If you've got dead cards in your hand, especially late game with lands, you just want to ditch those for better cards anyway. So it's not going to get you ahead, but it will replace them with more effective cards.
For sure. Yeah. All right, and the last card I have is Pull from Tomorrow, which is a blue instant, costs X double blue, and simply says draw X cards, then discard a card.
Yep.
So while it doesn't stick around the game and draw you cards for relative cheap cost, it does draw you a larger mass of cards for one card effect.
Yes.
Sometimes this is just important in later games where you just need to draw a bunch of cards and find that win condition for your next turn, and then you've dug sufficiently deep to be able to find it.
Yeah.
But also can be good early game if you're just looking for that one land drop, or you're trying to filter early.
That's true.
Definitely a different flexible choice,
Yep.
but has the larger long game impact.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, yeah, later in the game, would you rather have on turn 9 a risk stud in your hand or a pull from tomorrow?
Yeah.
I think 99% of people probably say the pull from tomorrow, so you can, draw whatever it is, 10 cards, discard 1, and put you way ahead, dig to the card that you need to get instead of, okay, risk study. Do people want to start playing cards and hopefully I'll draw into what I need eventually?
Yeah, no, not all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, what you got?
Agree.
What do you got next?
All right, our last one, you might have seen it coming since I kind of brought up in the very beginning of the show, is Cyclonic Rift. So Cyclonic Rift, for those of you who don't know, is an instant that costs 1 and a blue and says return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand and has an overload cost of 6 and a blue. So essentially, if you do that, all of your opponent's non-land permanents get bounced and yours stay on the field at instant speed for 7 mana, one-sided board wipe. Yes, it's an extremely powerful card, and there is nothing else like it in Commander.
Yep, for sure.
Yes, it is. It's a very powerful blue card. That does not mean that it goes in every single blue deck without thinking about it.
Right.
And that's the problem that I have with a lot of decks out there, that I see this played in a specific deck, and I think with this kind of list, I'm going to go through actual commanders that I think it has no right to belong in, and I see it in a decent enough percentage of decks where I'm concerned. So start thinking, people, please.
Yeah.
It's a very powerful card. Again, boring, overplayed, but good for the right deck.
Yeah.
Here's some decks that it's not good in my opinion, and that you should consider taking out if you have it in there. First one, Golos, Tireless Pilgrim, one of my favorite commanders as of recent. Essentially, I'm not going to go through the entire card, but basically you can pay 2 in Wooburg and exile the top 3 cards of your library and then play them this turn without paying their mana cost. So Golos wants to essentially ramp and then activate that ability as many times as it can. You just want to just keep going over and over and over again and just have a huge turn where you're cheating giant things off the top of your library, and it can be very impactful and great. The problem is with Cyclonic Rift is that if you hit Cyclonic Rift off the top 3, do you get that overload cost? No. So you're bouncing 1 permanent. 1 non-land permanent. Not worth it. And people say, well, I'm going to draw it, so I'll get to use it then. Perfect. Yeah, but if your Golos deck is working correctly, you're going to be getting more things off the top than you're going to be drawing. So chances are you're going to be hitting that Cyclonic Rift instead of actually hitting things that are going to be more useful, such as other board wipes that are one-sided.
Right.
In Garrix Wake, destroys all creatures you don't control and all planeswalkers you don't control. It costs 9 mana, which is 2 more than Cyclonic Rift's overload cost, but in a Golos deck, that does not matter.
Yeah. Again, happy to pay 2 in Wooburg for that card.
Exactly. You're blowing up everyone's stuff. And again, this is destroying versus bouncing, which is generally going to be better for most strategies. Maybe not against Miranda Mana strategy, but still. Urza's Ruinous Blast, one of my favorite board wipes, and I think one that is criminally underplayed. It says, it's a legendary sorcery for 4 and a white. It says, exile all non-land permanents that aren't legendary. So unlike Cyclonic Rift, this isn't bouncing things, this is exiling. Most things aren't legendary that are going to be on the board. Unless you're playing against like a Kethis deck, or is it Kethis? Whatever that legendary one that cares about legendaries is. Most of the time, this can be much more impactful. And again, if you hit off the top, it's going to be much better. Volcanic Vision. Even Volcanic Vision is better than Cyclonic Rift in this deck, in my opinion. It's a sorcery that costs 5 red. It says return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. Volcanic Vision deals damage equal to that card's converted mana cost to each creature your opponents control. Exile Volcanic Vision. Most of the time in a Golos deck, you will have something that is significant enough, high enough converted mana cost in your graveyard that you want to get back, and that will just destroy your opponent's boards when you get it back with Volcanic Vision.
Did basically the same thing you wanted to do anyway.
Exactly. Yeah. Cyclonic Rift, you're going to hit it off the top with Golos, and you're going to be sad, so take it out of your Golos decks, please. All right, next up, Jorya Weatherlight Captain. Jorya Weatherlight Captain, in my opinion, does not want Cyclonic Rift either. She is a 3/3 human artificer that costs 2 blue red. She has, whenever you cast a Historic spell, draw a card. So in a Jorya deck, you usually want to go an artifact storm kind of route where you're just casting cheap artifacts over and over again, and you're just drawing throughout your entire deck, and you're getting your storm count up, and then you cast something big at the end. So Cyclonic Rift is going to bounce your opponent's stuff, but that's usually not necessarily what you even need to do with that deck. Sometimes you just want to bounce your own things too. So you're going to be more beneficial. Things will be more beneficial if you've got some more flexible cards that can help you bounce your own things too, like Aether Gale. Aethergale is a sorcery that costs 3 blue. It says return 6 target non-land permanents to the owner's hands. So it's not nearly as efficient as a Cyclonic Rift, which can bounce hundreds, thousands, whatever if you're playing as a token deck.
Right.
Yeah, you can bounce a ton of things back to your opponent's hands, but you can't bounce your own things.
Right.
So Aethergale, you can choose, let's say that there's 3 really kind of detrimental things to you on the board. You can bounce those things back to their hands, and you can bounce 3 of your own artifacts back to your hands so you can replay them, draw more cards, and just keep going. Another card, Displacement Wave. It costs X blue, and it's a sorcery. It says return all non-land permanents with converted mana cost of extra less to the owner's hands. So with this one, this is a very flexible card where if you're not in a situation where you need to bounce your opponent's things, you can just spend 2 mana for that X. So you're spending 4 mana in total, bouncing pretty much all of your little artifacts back to your hands, so then you can recast them and just have a huge turn out of it.
Yeah.
If you do need to bounce your opponent's things or opponent's permanents, you can. You just pay a little more in the X, and then you're bouncing their things as well.
Yeah, if you have flexibility to choose what you want out of the card.
You've got one or the other. It's not just a sledgehammer effect that Cyclonic Rift is. It's a more refined tool for that deck.
Yeah.
And then actually Temporal Fissure is one of my favorite cards of all time. And I love it in the Joyride deck because it always gets people and it's hard to stop. It's a sorcery for 4 and a blue. And it says return target permanent to its owner's hand, and it has Storm. So essentially, for every one of those little artifacts that you cast that turn, for every spell that you've cast in that turn, for every spell that has been cast in that turn, even by your opponents, you're getting an extra copy of that. Cyclonic Rift, remind me, can it actually get any? Can it bounce lands?
Pretty sure not.
Can Temporal Fissure?
Maybe.
Yeah, it can. So you can bounce. It can be a win con. It can bounce all of your opponent's perms, including their lands, and it can bounce your own things back to your hand if you're casting it earlier in the game so that you can just keep your engine going. Again, flexible cards are better in these kinds of decks.
Yeah, for sure.
And finally, let me go through one last one really quick. Muldrotha. Muldrotha, I do not think needs Cyclonic Rift. For those who don't know, Muldrotha says during each of your turns, you may play up to one permanent card. You may up to one permanent card of each permanent type from your graveyard. So Muldrotha cares about permanence. Cyclonic Rift, not a permanent. All Muldrotha decks do not have to be all permanent decks, but you're going to get more value out of permanent-based board wipes than you will based off of Cyclonic Rift.
Right.
Now, if you've got something like we're Eternal Witness and you can recur to get the Cyclonic Rift back, there's a lot more steps to make that work. But let me just go through some board wipes that you should be considering over Cyclonic Rift in those decks. Plague Boiler. Plague Boiler is an artifact that costs 3. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, put a Plague counter on Plague Boiler. You can then pay 1 black-green and put a Plague counter on Plague Boiler or remove one from it. When it has 3 or more plague counters on it, you sacrifice it and destroy all non-land permanents. So again, you're destroying permanents versus bouncing them, which is generally more impactful. You can also control when this one goes off by either putting more mana into it to add counters to it or to take them away. And it's one that you can get back in a Muldrotha deck to do it again.
Yep.
So again, permanents are important to Muldrotha, and that's why also I'm going to recommend Nevernull's Disc. Nevernull's Disc is an artifact that costs 4. When it enters the battlefield, it enters tapped. You can pay 1 and tap it to destroy all artifact, creatures, and enchantments. Very easy to recur because it blows itself up, just like Plague Boiler. And you can just keep getting that back and using it over and over again to wipe out your opponent's boards. And you're a board as well, but you've got ways to get your things back.
Oh, yeah.
Finally, Pernicious Deed. Pernicious Deed is an enchantment that costs 1 black-green, and you pay X, and then you sacrifice it to destroy each artifact, creature, and enchantment with converted mana cost of X or less. Again, destroying things just usually going to be more impactful. You can keep getting this back. I think I'm repeating myself here, but basically, Muldrotha cares about permanence. Cyclonic Rift, although it's a great card, is not a permanent. Are there ways to abuse it and recur it in that deck? Yes, but there's a lot of things you have to work around to do that.
Right, for sure.
Just with all these good stuff cards, for a lot of different reasons, I recommend really thinking about it and actually considering, am I including this just because it's good, or am I including it because it's actually good for this deck?
Right, for sure. And you'll find that sometimes with the right deck, some of these cards just are, have more power than maybe what is printed, or maybe your considerations for like the larger mass of commander decks.
Absolutely. 100%. Honorable mention real quick. I'm not going to go through the whole thing because I've talked for too long at this point anyway. I think a good stuff card that I think is pretty overrated and sees far too much play in the decks. Cultivate and Kodama's Reach, essentially the same card. Costs 3 or costs 2 and a green. You get a basic land in your hand and a basic land to play tapped. I think it costs too much compared to other options. Again, I mentioned earlier, I want to ramp on turn 2 generally. This ramps turn 3. Yes, it fixes for another turn, but there are decks that are running it that I believe should not be. A couple just to mention real quick. A Rixmathies, you want to get Rixmathies out on turn 3 consistently. Cultivate does not allow you to do that. Skullbriar, Skullbriar wants to come out on turn 2, and you want to use effects to get its counters up quickly and efficiently. You're not going to cast Skullbriar, and then the next turn go Cultivate. And then just, it's essentially a wasted turn in a Skullbriar deck.
Right.
Edric decks are very low to the ground. You've got a lot of small creatures. You do not need to ramp in those kinds of decks. You're just going to be getting more little creatures out and attacking with them, and that's it. You don't, if you have a Cultivate in your hand, in your opening hand, in most decks, you'd want to cast it on turn 3. In an Edric deck, if you cast on turn 3, you are doing something wrong because you're not casting Edric.
Yeah, and you're probably losing.
You're probably losing, yes.
Yeah.
So I will get off my rant about Cultivate. Better cards, Wafers, Bobble, Belgian Farmhand, Edge of Autumn, Grow from the Ashes for certain decks. Consider those over them, please. All right. Before we move on, after all that, Alek, do you find that you include good stuff cards like these in your decks, or do you try to avoid using them if possible?
Sure. Well, they always make the consideration list,
Sure.
at least, because, I mean, they're incredibly powerful cards.
Yeah.
If I want that sort of effect in the deck, I'm going to consider them.
Yeah, they're good for a reason.
Yeah. As we discussed, I tend to lean more towards the synergistic decks. So sometimes there are valid reasons to play these, because synergy decks sometimes, because you want to kind of like have the same effect over and over and over again, you have to make certain card selection choices that are less powerful as individual cards.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes when you do that, you have to make a large mass of them in the deck, and you have less slots sometimes for either win conditions or removal. So sometimes it's really tempting to play like a Cyclonic Rift in those kind of decks, because you kind of almost feel like you need to make up the power levels somewhere.
Sure.
However, though, I have been trying to actively choose other options if they fit well synergistic wise.
Sure.
So as you mentioned, the displacement wave instead of the Cyclonic Rift, if it does a good job of like bouncing all my creatures or my artifacts back to my hand so that I can recast them and play them for value.
Sure.
Makes it feel better in that case, and then I can also use that spell for still a mass removal spell if I have enough mana.
Yep.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
And another reason I typically try to move away from those as I build decks is because I feel like sometimes in gameplay, people will see a Cyclonic Rift played and overloaded and just kind of like sigh and be like,
Not
okay,
again.
this has turned into one of those games.
Yeah.
I get the most enjoyment and fun out of Magic when I can play a card and my opponents have to like lean in and read it.
Like, what in the world is that?
Yeah, but then it like sparks conversation,
Sure.
sparks inspiration in other people's
maybe
decks.
gets them to say, oh, that would be perfect for this deck that I have, because then not one's ever gone, but like, oh my gosh, I've never seen that Cyclonic Rift. That would be perfect for all of my decks.
Right.
Yeah.
But it just kind of has more of that, sparks that fun conversation
Sure.
around Magic, which is something that I just love.
Absolutely. Discovering new cards is always fun.
Yeah,
That's
definitely.
fantastic. Good perspective.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break so I can catch my breath after all that talking.
Blah, 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 blah.
We'll be right back. And we're back. Okay, so now we're going to get to one of my favorite segments of the show. Whatever it is, I can't talk. I've talked too much this episode. Card of the day. So on this segment, I'm going to have my guest, Alek, in case you forgot who he was in the past hour or however long we've been talking. He's going to go over and discuss a card. He's going to bring up a card that we're going to discuss. And he can bring it up for any reason. He can like it. He can hate it. He can just like the art in it. He could just have randomly hit the random generator on Scryfall and it popped up, and that's the one we're talking about. So what card are we chatting about today, Alek?
Well, I didn't do that, but one of my favorite cards is Vanish into Memory, which is a instant, costs 2 white-blue. And it says, exile target creature. You then draw cards equal to that creature's power. At the beginning of your next upkeep, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. If you do, discard cards equal to that creature's toughness.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of on our theme, like cards that might be a little bit underplayed, but like have a strong synergy with certain types of decks.
Absolutely.
I have found that I play this card sometimes over things like Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile.
Sure.
Even though those are incredibly powerful and low-costed cards, I like this card for its flexibility.
Sure.
So not only can you use it like Swords to Plowshares to remove a creature temporarily, you get cards. You can draw cards or loot cards based on the creature's power or toughness when you remove it that way.
Yep.
Also, it has some interesting side effects to like reset your own enter the battlefield triggers on your own creatures while still doing the same effect of drawing and or looting you cards.
Yep.
But my particular favorite strategy with this is in my Noyan Dar deck.
Yeah.
Noyan Dar's ability basically says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you get to choose one of your lands and you put +1/+1 counters on it and make it a creature.
Sure.
So casting this spell in a Noyan Dar deck means that you get to put more +1/+1 counters on one of the creatures that you've turned, or one of the lands you've turned into a creature.
Yep.
And then you draw cards equal to the number of +1/+1 counters that the creature has. So in Noyan Dar, you just fill the deck entirely with instants and sorceries. So sometimes you'll end up having like a 20/20 land sitting there.
Yeah.
When you cast this spell, you then draw 20 cards because the land gets blinked.
Yep.
But then in the next upkeep, it comes back, but it's still a land, but it's not a creature anymore.
Yeah.
So you don't have to discard any of
You
those
just drew
cards.
20 or 21 cards or whatever it is for 4 mana.
And most of the time, this particular card, after doing an effect like that, wins me the game just based on the pure card advantage I've drawn. But the card itself, isn't. I wouldn't consider it a good stuff card, but it still, did enough to get me there in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you mentioned before too about like against a token, like if someone's got, the Reefworm, or 9/9 Leviathan token or whatever, and you target it with Vanished Memory, you're drawing 9 cards, you're getting rid of that token, and you're not discarding anything because that's not coming back.
Right. Sure, it's not great against like opponents like Enter the Battlefield creatures. Avenger of Zendikar, you probably don't want to target.
Here,
with
have
this
some
one.
more plant tokens.
But still, it's got a lot of different strategies, and when played in the right way, it can just take over the game.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic card. Thank you for bringing that one up.
Thanks.
Okay, I think with that, that's pretty much our show. So now it's your turn. So are there any good stuff cards that you personally think are overrated and why? So let us know in the comments below.
Yeah.
Other than that, make sure you like, share, and subscribe again. Every little bit helps the channel. Follow us on Twitter at EDH Quarters. TCG Player affiliate link is bit.ly/Commanders Quarters. Again, if you're buying any decks or individual cards, every little bit just helps to support the channel. So why not help support the channel like that way? Playmats and merchandise, thecommandersquarters.com. Again, the Kickstarter, I believe, should be just up. I don't know how many days are going to be left in at this point when this episode comes out, but make sure you're checking that out. Again, fantastic playmat from our playmat art from Santiago Rosas. Thank you again so much for that. And then Patreon, patreon.com/Commanders Quarters. Patrons are the lifeblood of this channel. I could not do this without you. Thank you all again. So I think that's pretty much it for today. So thanks again for joining the show, Alek.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks again, and have a good one.